Today is Wednesday, December 28th, 2016, and this is the beginning of an interview with Les Huffman at the Summer Glen Golf Community in Ocala, Florida. My name is Sam Kwiatkowski, and I will be the interviewer. Could you tell us your full name and address?
Yes. My full name is Bernard Leslie Huffman III, Ocala, Florida, 34473.
Where were you born?
I was born in Nashville, Tennessee.
How old are you today?
I am 63 today.
Who were your parents, and what were their occupations?
Well, my father was Dr. B. Leslie Huffman, Jr., M.D. He was a family physician. And my mother was Frances Lee Matthews originally, before they got married, and she was a teacher.
Do you have any siblings?
I have a brother and a sister. Both of them are younger.
Did either of them serve?
No, neither of them served. My brother does work in the Norfolk Naval Shipyard, but he's not in the military.
That's pretty good. What were you doing before you entered the service?
I was pre-med at Vanderbilt University.
How long were you in schooling for?
I did 1 year, and then when the draft time came around and I was number 17, I decided it was time to enlist in the Navy as opposed to being drafted in the Army or Marine Corps.
Why did you choose the Navy?
Well, I was pre-med. I was raised to be a doctor. I grew up in hospitals and doctors' offices, and the Navy had the best school. My father was a doctor in the military as well. He was a colonel in the Army, and it was his recommendation that the Navy had the best medical program for me to go into, so that's why I chose the Navy.
What was your rank?
When I retired, I was Senior Chief Machinist Mate, which is an E8.
Where did you serve?
Well, let's see, I spent the first 11 years in, well, that's not true. I went to boot camp in San Diego. Then I went to Machinist Mate A School in Great Lakes. And then Nuke Power School wasn't open yet. I didn't have a billet yet. So I served on the USS Meyer Corps DE 1058, waiting for my Nuke Power School billet to open. And when it opened, I went to Mare Island, California, and went to Nuke Power School for 6 months. And upon graduating, I went to the Nuclear Power Training Unit in Idaho Falls, Idaho, and actually spent 6 months training there, and then they picked me up for staff. So I spent almost 2 years there. And then after that, I went into submarines because I always had a passion to be in submarines. And it's a very unique community, and it really appealed to me. So I served on permanently about 7 or 8 submarines, and if you throw in temporary duty submarines, about 11. So, spent 21 years and 3 months in the service.
Wow.
I got medically discharged at that point. I had 4 days from the time they diagnosed me to the time I was medically discharged. It was high-by, so it was a good career. I miss it every day of my life.
Now, were you like a doctor on the submarines, or what did you do?
No, I was what they call a nuclear machinist mate, engineering laboratory technician. So we ran the nuclear reactor and the power train. All the electrical generation, water generation, all of that came out of the what they call the nuke spaces. And most of my career I served on the older submarines. They were converted World War II diesel boat submarines. So they took these diesel boats and cut them in half and stuck a nuclear reactor in the middle of them. And that's what I served on. Very unique community.
Yeah, seems different. Do you remember your basic training?
Oh, very clearly. Yes. Like I said, my dad was in the military, so he gave me advice before going to boot camp. And his advice was keep your mouth shut, do everything you're told to do it better than everyone else, and you won't have any problems in boot camp. And so that's what I did. And in boot camp, they give you a series of aptitude tests to determine what schools you're eligible for, that sort of thing. And I found out later I scored #1 in the battalion on those tests. So one day I'm out on the parade ground marching, and this full captain comes out there and calls out my name. And my platoon leader, the staff platoon leader, didn't know who I was. I'd done such a good job of staying quiet. He didn't even know which guy I was. So this guy took me into a little office, and he said, has anyone ever talked to you about the Navy nuclear power program? Because at that time I went in the Navy as a corpsman. And I said, no one's ever talked to me about it. And he said, well, would you like to join the nuclear power program? I said, well, does it go to Nam? And he says, well, if you go to Nam and you're on submarines, you'll never know you were there. I said, okay, where do I sign? And that's how I got into submarines. My 9th week boot camp orders were detached to Marine boot camp for in the field training. So I was going to go to Corpsman A school and then get transferred to the Marines and go to Nam. A third of my graduating class was killed in Nam. And small graduating class, 88 kids, but 19 of them were killed in Nam. And I just didn't have any desire whatsoever to go over there. Didn't mind serving, just didn't want to go to Nam.
Yeah.
Oh, other places I served, let's see, I spent about 10 years in Mare Island, California, primarily in the special project submarines. Those were the super secret submarines. And then I spent 3 years in Holy Loch, Scotland on the Hunley, which is a submarine tender, doing repairs on submarines that come in. And then I transferred to Groton, Connecticut, and retired from Groton, Connecticut after that. Somebody wants to get on camera here.
So what kind of special training did you have to receive for all the submarine work?
Well, the nuclear power school and nuclear power training unit are the equivalent of a degree, nuclear engineering degree, that you get in 1 year. So only the top 5% of the Navy gets to go to nuclear power school. It's very demanding, and back then it was a very high dropout rate. We would lose 30 to 40% of each class that couldn't make it through. And a lot of these were college graduates that were coming through, again, trying to avoid going to Nam, so they went in the nuclear power program. So I did that, and then right after I graduated from nuclear power training unit in Idaho Falls, they picked me up for what they call engineering laboratory technician. So I qualified ELT, and those are the people that do the nuclear chemistry on submarines. And I also was picked up for what's called the NESEP program, Naval Enlisted Scientific Educational Program. That's where they took people that were in the service, let them go to college for 4 years. When you graduate, you would get a commission, become an officer. And so you got to choose 3 choices of schools and 3 choices of what you wanted to study in school. I got about my 10th choice of each. So I wanted to go to school in Ohio because that's where my parents lived, and it would be in-state tuition. I got Purdue, which was out-of-state tuition. And I wanted to be an unrestricted line officer, which would be like a destroyer captain. That's the path I wanted to take. And I got an interview with Admiral Rickover saying, once a nuke, always a nuke. You're going to come to me when you're done. So I actually resigned out of school and said, okay, you got me. I'm back on submarines. Young, stupid mistake, but at the time, having just finished over a year's worth of studying, I didn't want to do it again. And if you took a commission, they would send you back to nuke power school, back to the nuclear power training unit. I didn't want to go through all that again, so I didn't. So then they screened me and sent me to the USS Parche. I served on the Parche and Seawolf, and they were called Special Project Submarines. And spent, I think, a little over 10 years in special projects. Most of the time on the Parche, a little bit on the other submarines that are part of that group. Again, temporary duty. Doesn't show up in my record as you were on board this submarine, but you know, I did 9.5-month patrol on one and a 9.5-month patrol on another one. So it's the same as being on it. Mm-hmm. And that was a very interesting program. Required top secret clearance, and it even required my wife to go to squadron and be briefed at a low level, and then she had to agree to allow me to be in the program. It's because it was very dangerous what we were doing. And I can't tell you anything about it though. I'm under, it's called OADR. Mm-hmm. I can't talk about it until 20 years after the Navy unclassifies it.
Wow.
I can tell you I cannot travel to a non-NATO country without contacting the Department of Defense and getting permission ahead of time. Otherwise I won't get a visa to go.
Wow. That's interesting. How did you adapt to military life?
I did very well. Submarines, like I said, are very unique. I've always been a loner. I grew up on a farm, and even though I had a brother and sister, I was pretty much on my own, did my own thing, and that's pretty much the way it is on a submarine. You don't have a lot of, there's no physical contact. One subsailor will never touch another subsailor. If two people are going along a narrow passageway, one will back up against the wall so the other one can come through without being touched. And so I did very, very well. I adapted very well. I can tell you a quick sea story that I had one guy later on in my career that came to a submarine that totally and completely freaked out. And they had to put him in a straitjacket and drug him, and he stayed in his bunk, in his rack, for 9.5 months.